I spent 40 years building a life for my son, working my way up from secretary to CEO while raising him alone after his father abandoned us. But I never imagined that after my hip replacement surgery, he would hand me eviction papers from the retirement community he'd chosen without my consent. What Alexander didn't know was that Pinnacle Innovations, the company where he'd recently become vice president and staked his entire career, was actually mine. I had founded it and still owned controlling interest through a network of holding companies he knew nothing about. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other in my post-surgery routine. Sunlight filtered through the lace curtains of the guest bedroom in Alexander's sprawling suburban home. I was carefully doing my physical therapy exercises when I heard his footsteps approaching down the hardwood hallway. 2 weeks had passed since my hip replacement, and though the doctors had warned about a lengthy recovery period, I'd been making steady progress. "Mom, you decent?" Alexander called through the door, his voice unusually stiff and formal. "Come in, dear," I said, adjusting my robe over my shoulders. The door opened, and Alexander stood there in his perfectly pressed charcoal suit, looking every bit the corporate executive he'd worked so hard to become. At 45, he had my eyes, deep, amber with flecks of gold, but his father's tall, lean build. After 25 years, the resemblance still occasionally caught me off guard. "How are you feeling today?" Alexander asked, though his gaze darted around the room rather than meeting mine. He hovered by the doorway instead of coming to sit beside me as he normally did during his perfunctory morning check-ins before heading to the office. "Better," I replied, reaching for my cane. "Dr. Patterson says I'm healing nicely. I might even start driving short distances next week." Alexander nodded distractedly, finally stepping into the room. He was carrying a cream-colored envelope, which he turned over in his hands several times. "That's good to hear. Listen, Mom, we need to talk about some things. Some arrangements." I felt a faint tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with my recent surgery. I'd raised Alexander by myself after Richard left, working my way up from company secretary to department head, then director, and eventually founding my own technology firm while ensuring Alexander had every opportunity I never had. I'd seen that particular expression on my son's face before. The slight tightening of his jaw, the way his left eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly. It was the same look he'd had when he was 19 and wanted to drop out of college to join his roommates' doomed startup. "What kind of arrangements?" I asked carefully. He cleared his throat. "Vanessa and I have been talking. The twins are entering middle school next year, and with all their activities ramping up, we really need the extra space." I glanced around the generously sized guest bedroom of their 6,000-square-foot house in Lakewood Heights. Alexander and Vanessa had built this mansion 3 years ago, insisting they needed every inch of it for their growing family and Alexander's professional image. "I understand," I said slowly. "Once I'm back on my feet, I'll be out of your hair. The doctor says maybe another 2 weeks." "That's the thing, Mom," Alexander interrupted, finally extending the envelope toward me. "We've found a really nice retirement community, Sunset Meadows, top-rated excellent medical staff, daily activities. We've already put down a deposit to hold your spot." My fingers felt numb as I took the envelope. "Retirement community? Alexander, I'm only 68. I just had hip surgery. I'm not incapacitated." "It's the sensible solution, Mom," he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to recognize when he thought he was being the rational one. "You shouldn't be alone in that big old house anymore. It's too much maintenance, too. Many stairs. What if something happens and no one's there to help?" I wanted to remind him that my big old house was the same elegant Victorian in Heritage Hill, where I'd raised him, the home that was fully paid off, the home where I'd built my business and maintained my independence. Instead, I opened the envelope. Inside weren't just brochures for Sunset Meadows, but legal papers. an agreement giving me 30 days to decide before the spot would be offered to someone else. You're making this decision for me? While I'm recovering from surgery? The words felt strange in my mouth. Alexander had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. It's not an ultimatum, Mom. It's a transition plan. The twins need this space for their activities. Emma wants to start a podcast studio, and Jacob needs room for his science projects. I stared at my son, this stranger in an expensive suit, who had once been the little boy I'd comforted after nightmares, the teenager I'd taught to drive in empty parking lots on Sunday mornings, the young man whose business school application essays I'd reviewed countless times until they were perfect. "Where's Vanessa?" I asked quietly. "At her Pilates class," Alexander replied, checking his Swiss watch. "She thought it would be better if I spoke to you alone." Of course she did. My daughter-in-law had always been careful to maintain plausible deniability when it came to family decisions, always the concerned in-law in public while privately, pushing Alexander toward choices that benefited her vision of their perfect life. "I see," I said, carefully refolding the papers and placing them back in the envelope. "And when exactly am I expected to make this transition?" "The room at Sunset Meadows will be ready next Monday. We've hired movers to pack up whatever you need from your house. The rest we can sell or donate." "Sell my things?" I felt a surge of indignation that made the surgical scar on my hip throb. "You've decided to sell my possessions?" Alexander straightened his already perfect tie. "Mom, be reasonable. Your house has 5 bedrooms. Sunset Meadows gives you a nice 1-bedroom apartment. You can't take everything." I thought about my home. Not just the furniture or clothing, but the lifetime of memories. Richard's study that I'd converted into my first office. My garden that I'd nurtured for decades. The sunroom where I'd held. The early meetings that led to the founding of Pinnacle Innovations, carefully keeping my ownership private through layers of corporate structures. Alexander knew nothing about my true role at Pinnacle. To him, I was just his retired mother who'd once had some kind of corporate job before selling the company to pursue other interests. He had no idea that the seemingly unremarkable technology consulting business I'd started had grown into one of the largest private software development companies in the country, or that 3 months ago, when he was interviewing for his vice president position, I'd quietly arranged for his selection, giving him preferential consideration without him ever knowing the connection. "I need some time to think about this," I said finally. "There's not much to think about, Mom. It's all arranged." Alexander glanced at his watch again. "I've got a big presentation at 10 chus. The new project management system rollout for the executive team. If this goes well, I'm in line for the COO position when Gladwell retires next year. If only he knew." I watched my son walk out, closing the door behind him. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so painful. The son who was moving me to a retirement community had no idea that I owned the company where he was staking, his entire career and future. That I had founded Pinnacle Innovations 30 years ago, building it from a 3-person operation in my converted study to a corporation with over 2,000 employees across 8 cities. That I still held controlling interest through a complex network of holding companies and investment trusts designed specifically to mask my ownership. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, wincing at the pull on my healing hip. I had a call to make to my assistant at Pinnacle. It was time to reconsider those favorable circumstances I'd arranged for my ungrateful son. If Alexander wanted to treat me like a burden to be discarded, perhaps it was time he learned exactly who he was dealing with. I waited until I heard the front door close and Alexander's luxury sedan pull out of the driveway before slowly making my way downstairs, leaning heavily on my cane. The house was silent. Vanessa wouldn't return from her Pilates class and subsequently scheduled lunch with friends for at least another 3 hours. The kitchen was immaculate, all gleaming granite, and high-end appliances that looked barely used. Vanessa preferred eating out or ordering in, claiming cooking was outdated for modern professional women. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I smiled faintly, remembering how I'd managed to cook homemade meals for Alexander almost every night, even while working 60-hour weeks, to build my company. I made myself a cup of tea and sat at the island, pulling my phone from my robe pocket. 3 quick taps, and I was connected to Judith, my executive assistant at Pinnacle for the past 18 years. "Eleanor, how are you feeling?" Judith's familiar voice was warm with concern. "I've been meaning to visit, but I didn't want to reveal anything to your son." "That discretion is exactly why you're invaluable to me," I said. "And unfortunately, very necessary. I need you to pull the complete file on Alexander Crawford's employment, including his current project assignments and performance reviews." "Give me a moment," Judith said. I could hear her fingers clicking across her keyboard. "Accessing them now. Alexander's performance has been good, though Director Chen noted some concerns about his tendency to take credit for team contributions. He's currently leading the Nexus Project Management System implementation. That's the presentation he's giving today to the Executive Committee." "And how critical is the Nexus project to Pinnacle's operations?" I asked, taking a slow sip of tea. "It's our largest internal investment this year," Judith replied. "The new system is supposed to increase efficiency by 30% and reduce overhead by nearly $12 million annually. Alexander has been very vocal about being the driving force behind it." "What he doesn't mention is that it was my concept originally," I said, feeling a familiar frustration. "I've been pushing for this integration for 3 years." "Yes, I remember the initial proposal you drafted," Judith agreed. "Alexander has made some modifications, but the core architecture is still based on your original vision." I nodded to myself. "And his potential promotion to COO?" The board was leaning toward recommending him, based largely on the anticipated success of the Nexus implementation. They're impressed by his Harvard MBA and corporate pedigree, though several members have expressed concerns about his leadership style. He's not particularly well liked by his team. This wasn't news to me. I'd watched Alexander's management approach with growing concern over the years. He'd always been ambitious, but somewhere along the way, that ambition had hardened into something less admirable, a willingness to step on others to advance his own interests. "One more thing, Judith. What's the status of the Sunset Meadows property?" More typing. "Sunset Meadows. Ah, interesting. The retirement community is actually owned by Westbrook Properties, which is one of the real estate portfolios in our investment group. We financed their expansion last year." I couldn't help but laugh, though it made my hip ache. "So my son is trying to move me into a facility that I technically own a significant stake in." "Appears so," Judith replied. "Eleanor, what exactly is going on?" I briefly explained the morning's events, including Alexander's plans to move me to Sunset Meadows and sell my possessions. That ungrateful little... Judith rarely lost her professional demeanor, but her loyalty to me ran deep. "What do you want to do?" she asked after composing herself. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I admitted, "but I need you to prepare a full briefing on the Nexus project, including all of Alexander's modifications and the potential risks his approach introduces. Also, cancel any special considerations regarding his potential promotion. Return all evaluations to standard protocols effective immediately." "Consider it done," Judith said. "Anything else?" "Yes, I need a car to pick me up tomorrow morning, and I need you to prepare my office at headquarters. I think it's time Eleanor Crawford made a reappearance at Pinnacle Innovations." "But Eleanor, your recovery will continue at the office, with appropriate accommodations," I said firmly. "Also, contact Margaret at the law firm. I need to review my estate planning documents as soon as possible." After finishing the call, I sat quietly watching sunlight dance across the kitchen floor. My heart felt heavy, not just from the pain in my hip. Where had I gone wrong with Alexander? When had he transformed from the thoughtful boy who made me? Handmade Mother's Day cards into this materialistic man who saw me as a burden? I slowly made my way back upstairs, each step a reminder of my physical vulnerability. In the guest room, I began carefully gathering my belongings, taking inventory of what I'd brought for my supposed 6-week recovery stay. Now I'd be leaving after just 2. The sound of the front door opening announced Vanessa's return. Her voice drifted up from downstairs as she talked loudly on her phone. Yes, next Monday. Mother Crawford is finally being moved to Sunset Meadows. I know, I've been counting down the days. Do you know she actually asked the housekeeper to make chicken soup from scratch? Like we're living in the 1950s or something. I paused in my packing, listening to my daughter-in-law laugh about me with whoever was on the other end of the call. The best part is Alexander finally convinced her it's for her own good. You know how she is, always going on about independence and managing on her own. Please, she can barely walk up the stairs without getting winded. That hip replacement is the perfect excuse to get her settled somewhere with supervision. My hand instinctively went to my hip, feeling the healing incision beneath my robe. My surgery was necessitated by years of working myself to the bone, partly to build my company, but largely to provide for Alexander after his father left. Anyway, Vanessa continued, once she's at Sunset Meadows, we can finally convert that room into Emma's podcast studio. I've already ordered the equipment and those sound-absorbing panels all the influencers use. My daughter's going to be a star, I just know it. I sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. It wasn't just Alexander who saw me as disposable. It was his entire household. I was simply an inconvenience to be managed, an obstacle to their lifestyle aspirations. The unfairness of it all washed over me. I'd spent my life making sacrifices for my son, building a company that now helped countless businesses achieve technological innovation through fair and ethical practices. Pinnacle Innovations had become known in the industry for its employee-first approach and commitment to sustainability, an approach I'd insisted on from the beginning. And here I was, being discarded by the very person I'd sacrificed everything for. I reached for the bottle of pain medication on the nightstand, carefully measuring out my prescribed dose. As I swallowed the pills, I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Alexander and Vanessa directly. Not yet. That would only lead to denials, perhaps even false remorse. No, this situation called for something more meaningful than a heated confrontation. Alexander needed to understand the true value of compassion and support, lessons he'd clearly forgotten, and there was no better teacher than consequence. I heard Vanessa coming up the stairs, still chatting on her phone. Quickly, I slipped back into bed and closed my eyes, feigning sleep. The door creaked open slightly. She's sleeping, Vanessa whispered into her phone. I swear that's all she does. Sleeps and complains about her incision hurting like she's the first person ever to have hip surgery. The door closed again, and I opened my eyes, a new resolve strengthening my spirit. Tomorrow I would return to my company, to my rightful place, and then I would begin carefully dismantling the preferential treatment I'd quietly arranged for my son all these years. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is to let their child face the reality of their own choices. The following morning, I woke before sunrise. Years of early mornings had ingrained the habit, even during my recovery. I dressed carefully, in a simple navy pantsuit rather than the comfortable loungewear I'd been wearing since the surgery. Today was about reclaiming my dignity and my identity. When the doorbell rang precisely at 7:30 a.m., I was ready, my small suitcase packed beside me. I opened the guest room door to find Vanessa in the hallway, still in her silk pajamas, hair disheveled and face-marked with confusion. "Who on earth is that at this hour?" she demanded, as if I'd personally orchestrated an inconvenience to her morning routine. "That would be my driver," I replied calmly, using my cane to maneuver past her with my small suitcase. She blinked, processing my appearance. "Driver? What driver? Where do you think you're going? Home, I said simply, continuing toward the stairs. Home? But we discussed this. You're moving to Sunset Meadows on Monday. Alexander has already arranged everything. I paused at the top of the staircase, turning to face her. I appreciate the concern, but I'll be continuing my recovery in my own home. Vanessa's perfectly sculpted eyebrows drew together. That's ridiculous. You can't be alone right now. What if something happens? Who's going to take care of you? I've arranged for a home health nurse to visit daily, and I have a fully equipped medical alert system. I began descending the stairs carefully, one hand firmly on the railing. Vanessa hurried after me, her voice rising with each step. This is exactly why we're moving you to Sunset Meadows. You're being stubborn and not thinking clearly. Alexander will be furious. Alexander is welcome to discuss it with me when he returns from work this evening, I replied, reaching the bottom of the stairs without incident, though I suspect he'll be rather busy today. The doorbell rang again. I opened it to find Raymond, Pinnacle's head of security, standing on the porch. At 6'2", with shoulders like a linebacker, Raymond had been with the company for 15 years after retiring from military service. Good. Morning, Mrs. Crawford, he said with a respectful nod. Your car is ready. Thank you, Raymond. I handed him my suitcase. Vanessa appeared behind me, her face flushed with anger. Who is this man? What's going on, Eleanor? This is Raymond, a colleague of mine, I said, deliberately vague. He's helping me get home safely. A colleague from your retirement? Suspicion crept into her voice. What aren't you telling us? I turned to face my daughter-in-law fully. There's a great deal I haven't told you, Vanessa, but that was my choice, not an obligation. Now, if you'll excuse me. You can't just leave. What am I supposed to tell Alexander? I paused at the threshold. Tell him I received his message loud and clear, and that I'll be responding in kind very soon. Raymond helped me into the back seat of the sleek black Lincoln, and we pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I could see Vanessa standing in the doorway, her phone already pressed to her ear, no doubt calling Alexander in a panic. Everything all right, Mrs. Crawford? Raymond asked, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. It will be, I said, watching my son's house disappear around the corner. It will be. The drive to my home took 30 minutes through tree-lined streets and past the downtown area where I'd opened my first Pinnacle office 28 years ago. My house came into view, a stately Victorian in the Heritage Hill district that Alexander and I had called home throughout his childhood. The sight of it with its wraparound porch and mature oak trees filled me with a sense of homecoming I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Judith was waiting on the porch alongside a woman in scrubs I didn't recognize. As Raymond helped me from the car, Judith rushed forward. "Welcome home, Eleanor," she said, giving me a gentle hug, mindful of my healing hip. "This is Nurse Carter. She'll be overseeing your home care." Nurse Carter stepped forward with a professional smile. "Mrs. Crawford, I've set up everything you'll need in the master bedroom on the first floor, as Ms. Winters instructed. I understand you're recovering from hip replacement surgery." I nodded, allowing them to guide me inside. My home was exactly as I'd left it, but Judith had added fresh flowers in the entryway and opened the windows to let in the spring breeze. "Now," Judith said once I was settled in my favorite armchair in the living room, "are you ready to hear about the morning's developments? I assume Alexander has received some unexpected news." I accepted the cup of tea Nurse Carter handed me. Judith's professional demeanor cracked slightly with a satisfied smile. "Oh yes, your son has been trying to reach anyone, at Pinnacle for the last hour regarding his presentation. According to our receptionist, he's becoming increasingly distressed." I nodded. "What exactly happened with the presentation?" "As you instructed, I had our technical team review Alexander's Nexus implementation plan in detail. They identified several critical flaws in his approach, flaws that would have become apparent during his presentation to the executive committee. Rather than allowing him to stumble through it, I rescheduled the meeting for next week to give him time to refine his proposal. I sipped my tea thoughtfully. And has he been informed about these flaws? Not yet. Director Chen is scheduled to meet with him at noon to review the issues. He'll be presenting the technical team's concerns as if they were just discovered during a final review. Perfect. That gives Alexander an opportunity to correct his mistakes rather than being embarrassed in front of the executive committee. Judith raised an eyebrow. That's quite generous considering what he was planning to do to you. This isn't about revenge, Judith. It's about teaching him a lesson about consequences and respect. I set my cup down carefully. What else do I need to know before I return to the office tomorrow? The quarterly reports are ready for your review. The new healthcare initiative has exceeded expectations, and the sustainability project is on target. However, there are some concerns about the Singapore expansion that require your attention. I nodded, already mentally shifting back into CEO mode. Have the complete files sent over this afternoon. I'll review them before tomorrow's meeting. As Judith prepared to leave, my phone rang. Alexander's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. Mom, where are you? Vanessa said you left. Call me immediately. It was followed by another. Something's wrong with my presentation to the executive committee. It's been postponed. They said there are technical concerns. Call me. And another. Mom, this is serious. I need your support right now. Please call me back. I handed the phone to Judith. Please hold all calls from Alexander and Vanessa until tomorrow. I need today to rest and plan. After they left, Nurse Carter helped me to my study, the room that had once been Richard's domain, but which I'd transformed into the birthplace of Pinnacle Innovations. It was here that I'd worked countless nights developing the proprietary algorithms that would become the foundation of our enterprise software, all while Alexander slept upstairs. The study remained largely unchanged over the decades. The same oak desk, the same wall of bookshelves now filled with industry awards and recognition that Alexander had no idea existed. I ran my fingers along the spines of technical manuals and business books that had guided me through the early years of entrepreneurship. On the credenza behind my desk sat a collection of photographs. Alexander's graduation from Harvard Business, school, his wedding to Vanessa, the twins as infants, family milestones that represented what I'd thought were shared values and connections. Beside them stood a small framed article from a local business journal dated 25 years earlier. Eleanor Crawford named Entrepreneur of the Year for Innovative Software Solutions. It was the first public recognition of Pinnacle's potential, published when Alexander was still in elementary school. I'd kept my professional accomplishments separate from my identity as Alexander's mother, believing it would be better for him to forge his own path without standing in my shadow. Now I wondered if that division had been a mistake, if by hiding my success, I'd inadvertently taught him to undervalue not just me, but women in general. As afternoon turned to evening, I reviewed the Nexus project files Judith had sent over. Alexander's implementation plan wasn't bad, but it prioritized style over substance, focusing on features that looked impressive in presentations while neglecting the core infrastructure improvements that would actually deliver the promised efficiency gains. It was a pattern I'd noticed in his career, choosing flash over function, appearance over substance. Had I contributed to this by always providing a safety net? By quietly clearing obstacles from his path instead of allowing him to develop problem-solving skills? My phone buzzed again with another message from Alexander. Mom, I'm coming over to your house after work. We need to talk about what happened this morning. Vanessa said you left with some man named Raymond? What's going on? I finally responded. I'm resting comfortably at home. We can talk tomorrow. His reply was immediate. This is ridiculous. You can't be alone after surgery. I'm coming. Over tonight, I turned off my phone. Alexander needed time to process the day's events, to feel the uncertainty that comes from having plans disrupted without explanation. exactly what he'd planned to do to me with his Sunset Meadows arrangement. Nurse Carter brought dinner on a tray, reminding me of my medication schedule and helping me through my evening physical therapy exercises. By the time she left at 8:00 p.m., I was exhausted but clearer than I'd been in months about what needed to happen next. I was preparing for bed when the doorbell rang repeatedly, followed by insistent knocking. Through the security system, I could see Alexander on my porch, still in his work clothes but looking distinctly disheveled, his typically perfect appearance beginning to fray. I pressed the intercom button. "Alexander." He spun toward the camera. "Mom, open up. We need to talk." "I'm resting as my doctor advised," I replied calmly. "We can speak tomorrow morning at my office." His face contorted with confusion. "Your office? What are you talking about? And why did you leave our house like that?" "We'll discuss everything tomorrow. Good night, Alexander." "Mom," his voice cracked with frustration. "I need to talk to you about what happened at work today. The Nexus project review was postponed because of technical concerns that no one briefed me on. My entire presentation was undermined." There it was. His primary concern wasn't my well-being but his own professional standing. Even now, with his plans for me temporarily disrupted, his focus remained on how events affected him. "I'm sorry you're having difficulties," I said, my voice steady. "But I suggest you review your implementation more carefully before the rescheduled presentation. The technical team often catches issues that executives might miss." There was a pause as he processed my unexpectedly specific knowledge. "How do you know about the technical team's review?" Suspicion crept into his voice. "I worked in technology management for 40 years, Alexander. These are standard procedures." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it in a way that suddenly made him look younger, more like the boy I remembered. "Please, Mom. I don't understand what's happening. First, you leave without warning. Now, my project is being questioned, and you're talking about an office. Are you angry about Sunset Meadows? We can discuss other options." I believe I made my feelings about Sunset Meadows quite clear by leaving. "As for your work situation, I suggest you gather your notes and prepare for your meeting with Director Chen tomorrow. Pinnacle Innovations doesn't make exceptions based on personal connections. What's Pinnacle to you? Why do you keep mentioning my company?" His frustration was building again, the control he prided himself on beginning to slip. "You'll understand tomorrow." "Good night, Alexander." I ended the intercom connection, watching as he stood there for several more minutes, alternating between knocking and checking his phone before finally returning to his car and driving away. I leaned against the wall, feeling the dull ache in my hip that had nothing to do with my surgical incision. Part of me wanted to throw open the door, to help him as I always had, but that impulse, that automatic response to shield him from discomfort, was precisely what had led us here. My phone rang again, this time showing Vanessa's name. I declined the call. Seconds later, a text appeared. "Eleanor, this has gone far. Enough. Alexander is falling apart. Whatever point you're trying to make, you're being cruel. Think about the twins. They need their father focused and present, not distracted by whatever game you're playing." I almost laughed at her attempt to use my grandchildren as emotional leverage. The same grandchildren she and Alexander had used as an excuse to move me to Sunset Meadows. I typed a simple response. "There's no game, Vanessa, only consequences. I suggest you prepare Alexander for significant changes to his professional circumstances." I set my phone to Do Not Disturb and carefully made my way upstairs to my bedroom, the same room where I'd comforted Alexander through childhood nightmares, where I'd reviewed business plans and software schematics while he slept down the hall. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, but also opportunities for truth. After decades of working behind the scenes, it was finally time to step into the light, to reveal not just my ownership of Pinnacle Innovations, but my expectations for the son who had benefited from my life's work without ever truly understanding its value. Morning arrived with a soft rain pattering against my bedroom windows. I took my time dressing for the day, selecting a tailored charcoal suit I hadn't worn since before my surgery. It had been my armor during countless negotiations and board meetings over the years. Practical, professional, and subtly powerful without being ostentatious. Today, I needed that familiar sense of authority. Nurse Carter arrived at 8:00 a.m. to check my vitals and help me with my exercises. "Your recovery is progressing nicely," she said, applying a pain-relieving gel to my hip. "But I'm concerned about today's activities. Stress isn't ideal for healing." "I understand the risks," I assured her. "But some matters can't be postponed," she nodded reluctantly. "Just promise me you'll take it easy. If you feel any pain or unusual fatigue, you'll stop and rest. I'll signal Raymond immediately if I need assistance," I promised. "He'll be with me throughout the day." After Nurse Carter left, I called a car service and made my way to Pinnacle Innovations headquarters downtown. The 15-story building, with its sleek glass facade, never failed to fill me with quiet pride. I'd started the company in my converted study with just 2 employees. Now, Pinnacle employed over 2,000 people and developed software solutions used by corporations worldwide. Raymond met me at the private entrance as arranged, escorting me to the executive elevator that would take us directly to the top floor. "Mr. Crawford called the office 3 times this morning," he informed me as the elevator ascended. "He's demanding to speak with Director Chen before their scheduled meeting." I raised an eyebrow. "How is Chen handling it?" "Professional as always." "He's sticking to the script. Technical concerns were raised. The presentation needs refinement. Standard procedure." There was a hint of amusement in Raymond's typically stoic expression. The elevator doors opened into a plush reception area, where Judith was waiting, tablet in hand. Her normally composed expression showed hints of satisfaction. "Everything is ready, Eleanor," she said, handing me a leather portfolio. "The conference room is prepared for your meeting with Alexander. He's been informed that the Pinnacle founder wishes to discuss his Nexus project proposal in detail." His reaction? Confusion, followed by excitement. He thinks it's an opportunity to impress someone with influence. Judith's mouth twitched. He has no idea who's waiting for him. I took a moment to collect myself, feeling the weight of what was about to transpire. For nearly 30 years, I'd kept my professional success separate from my relationship with Alexander. Part of me had always hoped he would take an interest, would ask meaningful questions about my career beyond the vague understanding that I used to work in tech. But he never had. "Let's not keep him waiting any longer," I said finally. Judith nodded and led the way to the executive conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Alexander sitting alone at the large table, reviewing notes with nervous intensity. He looked up as the door opened, his expression shifting from anticipation to utter shock as I entered. "Mom?" He stood abruptly, papers scattering. "What are you doing here?" "Good morning, Alexander," I said calmly, making my way to the head of the table with deliberate poise despite my cane. Raymond positioned himself discreetly by the door. "Please, sit down." He remained standing, confusion evident. "I don't understand. They said I was meeting with Pinnacle's founder." "You are," I replied, opening the portfolio Judith had given me. "Eleanor Crawford, founder and majority shareholder of Pinnacle Innovations. Please, sit." Alexander sank slowly into his chair, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. "This is impossible. You're retired. You worked for some tech company before I was born." I slid a document across the table toward him, the original incorporation papers for Pinnacle, dated 28 years earlier, bearing my signature and seal. "I founded Pinnacle Innovations in my study when you were 12 years old," I said, as he stared at the document. The some tech company I worked for previously was where I developed the expertise and connections to launch my own firm. I never retired. I simply chose to step back from daily operations and work through intermediaries. His face had gone pale. Why? Why would you hide this from me? It was the question I'd been anticipating. I wanted you to find your own path, Alexander, to succeed or fail on your own merits, not because you were the founder's son. He looked down at the incorporation papers, then back at me, his expression shifting from shock to something harder. So all these years when I was struggling to establish myself in tech, climbing the corporate ladder at other companies, you were watching? You could have helped me. I did help you, I corrected him. More than you know. Who do you think wrote the recommendation that got you the interview at Westfield Tech after college? Or made the introduction that led to your position at Global Soft? The difference is, I helped create opportunities. I didn't guarantee outcomes. Alexander stood again, beginning to pace. And my position here at Pinnacle? Did you arrange that too? You were qualified for the interview, I said carefully. Your experience was legitimate. But yes, I ensured your application received consideration. He stopped pacing, his expression darkening. So this is all a lie. My entire career is because my mother pulled strings. No, I said firmly. Your qualifications are real. Your abilities are real. But like many executives, you've benefited from connections and circumstances you weren't aware of. The difference is that most people recognize the privileges they receive. What's that supposed to mean? It means that while I was quietly supporting your career from behind the scenes, you were planning to ship me off to a retirement community without so much as a real discussion. It means you were willing to sell my possessions and dismantle my life for your convenience, never once considering what I might want or need. Alexander had the grace to look uncomfortable, though defensiveness quickly replaced it. That's not fair. The Sunset Meadows decision was about your well-being. Was it? I asked, meeting his gaze steadily. Or was it about the guest room Emma wants for her podcast studio? His eyes widened slightly. Vanessa told you? No. She told whoever was on the phone with her yesterday morning, loudly enough for me to overhear. Just as you've been telling your colleagues that the Nexus project was entirely your concept, despite it being based on algorithms I developed 3 years ago. He sank back into his chair. I don't understand what's happening. Why now? Why reveal all this now? I leaned forward slightly. Because it's time for truth between us, Alexander. Time to end the comfortable fictions we've both maintained. I pretended to be less accomplished than I am, and you pretended to be more considerate than you are. His jaw tightened. So this is punishment? Humiliation because I suggested a sensible living arrangement for you? This isn't punishment, I corrected him. It's consequence. There's a significant difference. What exactly does that mean for me? For my position here? I nodded to Judith, who had been standing quietly by the door. She stepped forward, placing another folder in front of Alexander. Inside, you'll find the technical team's complete assessment of your Nexus implementation proposal, I explained. The architecture has fundamental flaws that would have created significant security vulnerabilities. Had you presented yesterday as scheduled, it would have damaged your professional credibility severely. He opened the folder, scanning the detailed analysis with growing dismay. Why didn't anyone tell me this before now? Because you didn't ask, I said simply. According to your team members, you dismissed concerns from junior developers and refused to allow sufficient time for quality assurance testing. Alexander looked up sharply. You've been spying on me? I've been receiving the same reports I get on all executives, I corrected. Your behavior has been concerning. Taking credit for others' work, dismissing valid input from team members, prioritizing appearance over substance. He closed the folder with more force than necessary. So what happens now? You fire your own son to teach him a lesson? No, I said calmly. That would be punishment. Instead, you have choices. You can resign with a generous severance package and glowing recommendations. Or you can stay, acknowledging the project's flaws, implementing the necessary corrections, and changing your management approach. And if I stay, will everyone know who my mother is? That the great Eleanor Crawford has been pulling strings for her son? I shook my head. Only the executive team needs to know our relationship, but they will know that your work will be evaluated by the same standards as everyone else's. No special treatment, no exceptions. Alexander was silent for a long moment, absorbing everything. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. I still don't understand why you kept this from me all these years. Why live in that old house when you could afford something much better? Why drive that 10-year-old car? Why pretend to be just Mom? The question revealed so much about the gulf between our values. Because being just Mom was never a pretense or a lesser identity to me, I explained. And that house represents the life I chose, not a compromise I settled for. My success with Pinnacle allowed me to live exactly as I wanted, with purpose, comfort, and freedom from financial worry. I never needed the external trappings of wealth to validate my accomplishments. He seemed genuinely puzzled by this concept. But everyone at my level displays their success. The right house, car, schools for their children. It's expected. Expected? By whom? I asked gently. The same colleagues who talk behind your back about your management style? The same friends who measure friendship by status symbols? Those expectations are chains, Alexander, not achievements. He looked away, unable to hold my gaze. The silence stretched between us, filled with decades of misunderstandings and missed connections. Does Vanessa know about any of this? He finally asked. Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first. He nodded slowly. She won't handle it well. Our lifestyle, it's important to her. Then perhaps this is a conversation you need to have with your wife, I suggested. About priorities, values, what truly matters. Alexander rubbed his temples, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't know how to start over, Mom. I don't know how to be the son you deserve. You begin by seeing me as I am, I said. Not as an obligation or a resource, but as a person with my own life, my own accomplishments, my own agency. And I'll try to do the same for you, to see the man you are, not just the boy I raised. For the first time that day, perhaps in many years, Alexander truly looked at me, not as his mother who needed managing, but as Eleanor Crawford, accomplished businesswoman and founder. The Nexus Project, he said finally, tapping the folder. I need to fix this. Would you be willing to review my revisions before I resubmit? It was a small olive branch, but significant. Yes, I said. Not to do the work for you, but to provide feedback as I would for any executive. A tentative smile touched his lips. Fair enough. I should probably start right away. The presentation is rescheduled for next week. As he gathered his papers, a text notification lit up his phone screen. I glimpsed Vanessa's name and the words, "Did you convince your mother about Sunset Meadows yet?" Alexander saw me notice and had the grace to look embarrassed. I need to have a serious conversation with Vanessa, he admitted quietly. Yes, I agreed. You do. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated at the door. The twins have been asking about you, about when you're coming back to our house. I didn't know what to tell them when you left so suddenly. Tell them the truth, I suggested. In age-appropriate ways, of course. That grandma needed to be in her own home to recover properly. That sometimes adults make mistakes in how they treat each other, but they can learn and do better. He nodded thoughtfully. And about Pinnacle? About who you really are? I considered this. Yes, tell them that too. They should know their grandmother built something meaningful. Girls need those examples. So do boys, I thought, but didn't say. Alexander walked out, shoulders slightly slumped under the weight of revelations. I remained seated, feeling a complex mix of emotions. The confrontation had gone better than I'd feared, but worse than I'd hoped. There had been defensiveness and resentment, but also moments of genuine connection and perhaps the beginning of understanding. The path forward would be complicated, with both practical and emotional challenges to navigate. But for the first time in years, I felt like my son was actually seeing me, not as he wished me to be, but as I truly was. Not just his mother, but Eleanor Crawford, founder and CEO of Pinnacle Innovations, a woman who had built something lasting and meaningful through intelligence, perseverance, and vision. The road to rebuilding our relationship would be long, but at least now we would be walking it honestly. When I returned home from Pinnacle that evening, Nurse Carter greeted me with concern etched on her face. "You've overdone it," she scolded gently, noticing my pronounced limp. "Your body needs time to heal, regardless of what your mind decides is necessary." She was right, of course. The emotional intensity of the confrontation with Alexander had drained me more than I'd anticipated, and the physical strain of maintaining my professional composure had taxed my recovering hip. I allowed her to help me to the sofa in my living room, accepting the pain medication and ice pack she offered without protest. "The Richardson files are on your desk," she said, as she adjusted a pillow behind my back. "Judith dropped them off while you were still at the office. She said they're not urgent, but you'd want to review them before tomorrow." I nodded gratefully. Nurse Carter had quickly learned to navigate the complex intersection of my recovery and professional responsibilities, never questioning the stream of documents and calls that seemed unusual for a supposedly retired woman. "Did Alexander call?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "3 times. She handed me my phone, which I'd left at home deliberately. "And your daughter-in-law twice. I told them you were resting and would return calls when you felt up to it. Thank you." I scrolled through the messages, noting the evolution in Alexander's tone from defensive to contemplative. "We need to talk more about this. Call me when you can." Then, "I've been reviewing the technical analysis. You were right. There are serious flaws in the implementation plan. I've scheduled meetings with the development team for tomorrow. And finally, I told Vanessa everything. She's processing. Can we come see you tomorrow evening? There's a lot more to discuss." Vanessa's messages were less evolved. "How could you keep something like this from family? Do you have any idea how this makes Alexander look at work?" Followed by, "We need to talk about how we're going to handle this situation. The twins don't need to know everything right away. Call me to coordinate our story." I set the phone aside without responding. They both needed time to adjust to the new reality, a reality where I wasn't just Alexander's aging mother, but the founder and controlling shareholder of the company that represented his professional identity. The doorbell rang just as I was preparing for an early night. Through the security camera, I was surprised to see my neighbor Grace Jenkins standing on my porch, a casserole dish in her hands. "Let her in," I told Nurse Carter. Grace has been my neighbor for 20 years. Grace bustled in with the energy that had made her a formidable high school principal before her retirement 5 years earlier. At 73, she remained more active than many people decades younger, volunteering at literacy programs and mentoring young teachers. "Eleanor Crawford," she announced, setting the casserole on the coffee table. "When were you going to tell me you're some kind of secret tech mogul?" I couldn't help but laugh at her directness. "Who told you? Your grandson Jacob was in my yard this afternoon, helping me plant tomatoes. The boy was bursting with news about how his grandma founded Pinnacle and owns the whole company. Said his dad works for you but didn't even know it." She sat down opposite me, eyes twinkling with curiosity. "Is it true?" "Most of it," I admitted. "Though I don't own the whole company, just a controlling interest." Grace shook her head in amazement. "All these years I thought you were a retired office manager or something. We've been in book club together for 15 years, Eleanor. 15 years. It wasn't something I discussed," I said simply. "Well, it explains a few things," she mused. "Like how you could afford to anonymously fund the library expansion." "Oh, yes?" she added, seeing my surprise. Margaret Sullivan on the library board let it slip after too much wine at their fundraiser last year. Don't worry, your secret was safe with me. I smiled, remembering the donation I'd made through one of my foundations. The library needed more space for the children's section. And now I hear from young Jacob that you're going to teach him about computers and business, Grace continued. Apparently you're much cooler than he previously thought. This was news. To me. Jacob said that? Oh, yes. Said his dad told him all about how you built a big company from nothing, and that maybe next weekend you could show him how computers work. She raised a skeptical eyebrow. Though I suspect an 11-year-old boy knows more about computers than either of us already. The thought of Alexander telling the twins about my accomplishments with pride rather than embarrassment was unexpected and touching. Perhaps our confrontation had affected him more positively than I'd dared hope. After Grace left, extracting a promise that I would return to book club once my hip had healed sufficiently, I found myself reflecting on how quickly life's currents can shift. Just 3 days ago, I'd been a patient in Alexander's guest room, facing the prospect of being moved to Sunset Meadows against my wishes. Now, I was back in my own home, my professional identity revealed, and the relationship with my son entering uncharted territory. The next morning brought a flurry of activity at Pinnacle. Alexander had apparently arrived at the office by 6:30 a.m., called an emergency meeting with his development team, and openly acknowledged the flaws in his implementation plan. According to Judith, who called to update me while I worked from home, he had taken full responsibility for the issues and established a new collaborative approach to address them. Chen says he's never seen Alexander like this, Judith reported. He actually listened to the junior developers, incorporated their feedback, and credited them by name in the revised proposal. It's like an invasion of the body snatchers. People can surprise us when given the opportunity, I said, thinking of the subtle changes I'd observed during our confrontation. Perhaps, Judith sounded unconvinced. Oh, and the board chairman called. Apparently, Alexander requested a meeting with him this morning and disclosed your relationship. The chairman wants to speak with you about maintaining appropriate corporate governance in light of this development. Schedule it for tomorrow afternoon, I instructed, and have legal prepare a briefing on our options for addressing nepotism concerns transparently. By mid-afternoon, I was reviewing the revised Nexus implementation proposal Alexander had sent over. The changes were substantial and thoughtful, incorporating not just the technical fixes, but a more realistic timeline and comprehensive testing protocol. He'd even included an appendix acknowledging the team members whose input had shaped the improvements. At precisely 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Alexander and Vanessa stood on my porch, both looking less polished than usual. Vanessa had foregone her typical designer outfit for simple jeans and a sweater, while Alexander's tie was loosened and his hair slightly rumpled from what had clearly been a long, intense day. Please come in, I said, stepping aside with my cane to allow them entry. They followed me to the living room, where I'd arranged tea and coffee on the side table. The formality of our last interaction had dissolved somewhat, replaced by an awkward uncertainty on both sides. Your hip looks better, Alexander observed as I carefully lowered myself into my armchair. It's improving daily, I confirmed. Nurse Carter is an excellent therapist. Vanessa, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. Eleanor, I want to apologize for my text messages yesterday. They were inappropriate, given the circumstances. Her tone was stiff, but seemed genuine. I nodded acknowledgement, waiting to see where this conversation would lead. Alexander cleared his throat. I've been thinking about everything, Mom. About how I've taken you for granted. About how I made assumptions about your life and needs without ever really asking. We both did, Vanessa added quietly. And about how you supported my career in ways I never knew, Alexander continued. The revised Nexus proposal you saw today? It's better than anything I would have developed on my own. Because for the first time, I really listened to my team instead of just assuming I knew best. That's growth, I acknowledged, though it shouldn't have taken this kind of revelation to get there. No, he agreed soberly. It shouldn't have. I've been thinking about patterns in my life, how I've approached challenges, relationships, parenting. I'm not particularly proud of what I've realized. Vanessa reached for his hand, a gesture of support that surprised me. Their relationship had always seemed more transactional than emotional. We've been talking, she said, really talking, maybe for the first time in years, about our values, our priorities, what we want the twins to learn from us. Alexander nodded. The Sunset Meadows plan. It was wrong. Not just the decision itself, but the way we made it. Assuming we knew what was best for you without consulting you. I'm sorry, Mom. The apology seemed genuine, but I needed to be certain they truly understood. What exactly are you sorry for, Alexander? For the plan itself, or for the fact that it backfired because I turned out to be more powerful than you assumed? He winced at the directness of my question but didn't evade it. Honestly, at first it was probably the latter. I was in shock, embarrassed, angry even. But today, working with my team, seeing how much better the results were when I actually listened to them, it made me think about how I've been treating you, how I stopped seeing you as a person with agency and started seeing you as a problem to manage. That's what I'm truly sorry for. It was a more insightful response than I'd expected, suggesting that perhaps the confrontation had catalyzed genuine reflection rather than just damage control. We've made some decisions, Vanessa said, straightening her shoulders. About our lives, our priorities. We're putting our house on the market. This was unexpected. Your house in Lakewood Heights? But you've only been there 3 years. Alexander nodded. It's too much. Too big. Too expensive. Too focused on impressing people whose opinions shouldn't matter. We found a smaller place closer to the twins' school. No mortgage, reasonable taxes, good neighborhood. The market's strong, Vanessa added with practical awareness. We should be able to sell quickly and use the equity to eliminate our debt, live within our means for once. I studied them both carefully, looking for signs that this was merely performance, an attempt to placate me now that they understood my true position. But there seemed to be a genuine shift in their demeanor. A weight lifted, despite the practical challenges they still faced. What about your position at Pinnacle? I asked Alexander. Have you decided whether you'll stay? If you'll let me, he said simply. I'd like the chance to prove myself, really prove myself, on my own merits. The Nexus project can be successfully implemented with the revisions. I believe in it, and in what it can do for the company. The board will have concerns. About nepotism, I warned. About whether you're being evaluated fairly, whether you'll receive special treatment. Then we establish clear protocols, he suggested. Transparent evaluation metrics, regular review by independent board members, maybe even an external assessment of my performance. Whatever it takes to ensure integrity in the process. His thoughtful approach to addressing the governance issues impressed me. It showed a maturity I hadn't seen from him before. And what about us? I asked, looking between them. Our relationship moving forward? Vanessa spoke up. We'd like to start over in a way. Build something more authentic. The twins miss you terribly. They've been full of questions since Alexander told them about your company. Especially Emma. She says she wants to be like you when she grows up. The thought of my granddaughter finding inspiration in my story brought unexpected emotion. For years, I'd kept my professional accomplishments separate from my identity as their grandmother, believing the division necessary and beneficial. Now I wondered what opportunities for connection I might have missed. There's something else, Alexander said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew an envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a check, a substantial one. What is this for? I asked, though I had a suspicion. "It's every penny we can pull together right now," he explained. "A first payment toward what we borrowed. Over the years, the down payment on our first house, the loan for my MBA, all of it. We know it doesn't come close to covering everything, but it's a start." "I never expected repayment for those things," I said truthfully. "They were gifts." "They shouldn't have been," Vanessa interjected with surprising firmness. "We should have lived within our means from the beginning. We're going to repay everything, even if it takes years." I looked down at the check, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The amount wasn't significant to me financially, but what it represented was priceless. Acknowledgement, responsibility, a commitment to change. "I appreciate the gesture," I said finally, "but I'd like to suggest an alternative." They exchanged a glance, then turned back to me questioningly. "I'd like this amount to be the first deposit in the twins' education funds instead," I proposed. "A fresh start for the next generation." Alexander's eyes widened slightly. "You still want to help with their education after everything?" "They're my grandchildren," I said simply. "Their future shouldn't be compromised by adult mistakes." Vanessa's composure finally broke, tears welling in her eyes. "Why are you being so kind to us? We don't deserve it." "This isn't about deserving," I replied. "It's about family, about moving forward with honesty rather than resentment." I poured tea for each of us, the familiar ritual giving me a moment to collect my thoughts. "I made my own mistakes in our relationship," I continued. "Keeping my success hidden from you, Alexander, wasn't entirely for your benefit. It was also easier for me to compartmentalize my life, to be just mom in one context and Eleanor Crawford, CEO, in another. But that separation created distance between us." Alexander nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about that too. About how little I really know about your professional life, your accomplishments. I never asked. And I never offered," I acknowledged. "We both contributed to the disconnect." Vanessa set down her teacup carefully. "So where do we go from here? How do we rebuild after all of this?" It was a fair question, and one without simple answers. "Day by day, with honesty and respect," I said. "It won't be easy or quick. Trust takes time to rebuild. We'd like to start by having you over for dinner once you're feeling stronger," Alexander suggested. "At the new place, once we've moved. Nothing fancy, just family time. The twins miss you." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. "But first, there's something else we need to discuss." I set my cup down, shifting to a more business-like posture. "I've revised my estate plan. The attorneys are preparing the final documents, but you should know the general structure." I explained the new arrangements, a series of milestone-based trusts for the twins' education and future needs, partial ownership opportunities at Pinnacle contingent on demonstrated aptitude and proper training, and the significant portion that would go to the charitable foundation I'd established years earlier. To my surprise, neither of them objected. Alexander listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the governance structure and transition timelines. "It's fair," he said when I finished. "More than fair, really. You've built something extraordinary, and it should be preserved and managed responsibly." As they prepared to leave later that evening, Alexander hesitated, then leaned down to give me a gentle hug, mindful of my healing hip. "I'm sorry, Mom, for everything." "I know," I said, returning the embrace. "We'll be okay." After they left, I sat quietly in my living room, processing the unexpected turns the evening had taken. Alexander and Vanessa's transformation seemed genuine, though whether these changes would endure remained to be seen. Financial pressure and public accountability had a way of revealing true character, for better or worse. But for the first time in years, I felt cautiously hopeful about my family's future. Not because circumstances were easy, but because we were finally facing them together with honesty. As the evening shadows lengthened across my living room, I realized that my surgical recovery had become something more, a healing of old wounds. I hadn't fully acknowledged an excising of resentments as damaging as any physical ailment. The road ahead would have its complications, but for now, this moment of truth felt like enough. The weeks that followed brought changes both expected and surprising. My physical recovery progressed steadily, with Nurse Carter eventually reducing her visits to twice weekly. Meanwhile, Alexander and Vanessa's transition unfolded with remarkable speed. They sold their Lakewood Heights mansion within 2 weeks at a modest profit, using the proceeds to clear their debts and purchase a comfortable 4-bedroom colonial in Riverdale, a well-established neighborhood known for its excellent schools, rather than its prestige. I visited their new home once they'd settled in, impressed by the transformation not just in their living space but in their attitudes. The house was warm and inviting, half the size of their previous residence, but somehow feeling more spacious in its thoughtful arrangement. We donated most of the furniture, Vanessa explained as she showed me around. Kept only what we actually used and loved. It's liberating, honestly. The twins had adapted better than anyone expected. Emma had converted a corner of the family room into a modest podcast setup, where she interviewed family members about their lives and interests, a project inspired, Alexander told me privately, by learning about my secret identity as a tech founder. She's interviewing all the women in the family about their careers, he said with a hint of pride. Says she's documenting an oral history of female achievement for a school project. Jacob, meanwhile, had thrown himself into learning, programming with unexpected enthusiasm. "Can I show you my app, Grandma?" he asked during my visit, pulling me toward the desktop computer in the study. Dad helped me with some of the code, but I did most of it myself. The app was a simple calculator with a space theme, but his excitement was contagious. For the first time, I saw in my grandson the same spark of curiosity about technology that had driven my own career. At Pinnacle, Alexander's transformation continued to surprise even the most skeptical observers. The revised Nexus system had launched successfully, delivering the promised efficiency improvements while avoiding the security pitfalls of the original design. More significantly, Alexander's management style had undergone a complete overhaul. The team actually looks forward to meetings now, Director Chen reported during one of our weekly updates. Crawford listens, acknowledges others' contributions, and has implemented a collaborative decision-making process that's improving morale across the department. Even Judith, who had viewed Alexander's redemption arc with professional skepticism, had to admit the changes appeared genuine. He asked me to mentor 2 junior executives in his division, she told me, clearly surprised by the request. Said my experience would be invaluable to their development. I almost checked him for a fever. 6 weeks after our confrontation, I was sitting in my study reviewing quarterly reports when Judith called with unexpected news. Alexander just submitted his resignation as VP of Project Development, she said without preamble. My heart sank. Despite our reconciliation, had he found the scrutiny and nepotism concerns too challenging? Did he say why? He wants to transfer to new business development instead, Judith continued. It's a lateral move at best, possibly even a step down in terms of prestige. His reasoning is interesting. He says his skills are better suited to building relationships and identifying opportunities than managing complex technical implementations. I considered this with surprise. It was perhaps the most self-aware professional decision Alexander had ever made, acknowledging his limitations, rather than positioning for advancement at any cost. What's your assessment? I asked, valuing Judith's unvarnished opinion. I think he's right, she admitted. He's always been better at the relationship side of the business than the technical depth, and he's requesting Marcus Chen as his direct supervisor, which means he's voluntarily putting himself under one of our most demanding directors. Approve the transfer, I decided, but ensure the board understands this was his initiative, not mine. The following Sunday, I received another surprise visitor. I was in my garden, enjoying the ability to kneel carefully among my flowers for the first time since surgery when Vanessa appeared at the garden gate. "Eleanor," she called, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Do you have a few minutes?" I invited her to join me on the garden bench, noticing she carried a leather portfolio similar to the one Alexander had used when presenting the Sunset Meadows plan that had catalyzed our family upheaval. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, smoothing her skirt nervously, "about my priorities, my contributions, who I want to be in this next chapter of our lives." She opened the portfolio, revealing not retirement home brochures, but a business plan. "I want to start a consulting practice helping seniors navigate healthcare decisions and living arrangements with dignity and agency. Not making decisions for them, but ensuring they have all the information to make choices that are right for them." I raised an eyebrow, impressed by the thoroughness of her research and financial projections. "This is quite comprehensive." "I've been working on it." "For weeks," she admitted. "My marketing background gives me a foundation, but I've been studying elder care options and patient advocacy approaches. There's a real need for someone who can bridge the gap between medical recommendations and practical implementation without taking control away from the individual." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Vanessa, who had been ready to move me to Sunset Meadows without meaningful consultation, now wanted to build a career ensuring others weren't treated that way. "It's because of you," she said, seeing my expression. "Watching how we almost made a terrible mistake, thinking we knew what was best for you. It made me realize how many families do this, thinking they're helping when they're actually taking away someone's autonomy." She hesitated before continuing. "I'm not asking for investment. Alexander and I have agreed that this needs to be my own achievement, something I build independently. But I would value your perspective, your experience as both a business founder and someone who was almost on the receiving end of well-intentioned but misguided help." I studied my daughter-in-law with new appreciation. The perfectly polished social climber I'd known for 20 years had been replaced by someone with purpose and self-awareness. "I'd be happy to review your plan in detail," I offered, "and to connect you with some colleagues in the healthcare technology sector who might provide valuable insights." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you. That means a lot." As we walked through the garden discussing her concept further, I realized how rarely Vanessa and I had engaged in meaningful conversation prior to the family upheaval. Our relationship had been cordial but distant, defined by holiday gatherings and obligatory family events rather than genuine connection. "Why didn't we ever talk like this before?" I asked suddenly. Vanessa paused, considering the question seriously. "I think I was intimidated by you, though I wouldn't have admitted it. You seemed so self-contained. Like you didn't need anyone or anything. I couldn't understand it, so I dismissed it as a lack of sophistication or ambition. And now? Now I see it was strength," she said simply. "The confidence to define success on your own terms rather than chasing external validation. It's what I'm trying to learn now." 2 months after my confrontation with Alexander, I was finally ready to return to Pinnacle headquarters full-time. My hip had healed well, allowing me to walk with only an occasional supporting cane. More importantly, the emotional healing within our family had progressed beyond my cautious expectations. As I prepared for my first full board meeting since the revelation of my relationship with Alexander, I reviewed the quarterly performance reports with satisfaction. The Nexus implementation was delivering even better results than projected. Employee satisfaction scores had improved significantly in Alexander's former department, and his transition to new business development had already yielded 2 promising partnership opportunities. The doorbell rang just as I was gathering my materials for the meeting. Through the security camera, I saw Alexander standing on my porch, holding what appeared to be a small wrapped package. I thought I might drive. "You to the board meeting," he offered when I opened the door. "If that's acceptable." It was a simple gesture, but meaningful, acknowledging both my continued recovery and our shared professional destination. During the drive downtown, we discussed business matters comfortably, a new dynamic that blended our family connection with professional respect. As we neared headquarters, Alexander cleared his throat nervously. "Before we arrive, I wanted to give you something." He handed me the small package he'd been carrying. Inside was a framed photograph I hadn't seen in years. Alexander at age 10, standing beside me at a science fair where he'd won second place for a simple computer program that calculated lunar phases. We both looked exhausted but triumphant after staying up all night to finish the project when his original idea had failed spectacularly the day before the competition. "You kept this," I said, surprised by the wave of emotion the image triggered. "I found it when we were packing for the move," he explained. "It made me remember how you taught me to code that night, how patient you were even when I was frustrated and ready to quit. Looking back, I realized that was probably during the same period when you were founding Pinnacle." I nodded, remembering that chaotic time. The initial funding had just come through. I was working 18-hour days between the company and being a single mother. "Yet you still made time to help me with a school project," he said quietly. "Not by doing it for me, but by teaching me how to solve the problem myself." "That's what parents do," I said simply. "Not all parents," he countered. And somewhere along the way, I lost sight of those lessons. Started looking for shortcuts, validation, external markers of success. I studied my son's profile as he navigated the morning traffic, seeing echoes of both the determined boy he'd been and the more thoughtful man he was becoming. "I've been thinking about legacy," he continued as we pulled into the Pinnacle parking garage. "Not just inheritance or position, but what we leave behind in terms of values and example. What I want the twins to learn from me." "And what have you concluded?" I asked, genuinely curious about his reflection. "That success without integrity isn't success at all. That shortcuts eventually lead to dead ends. That listening is often more valuable than speaking." He smiled slightly. "All lessons you tried to teach me that I had to learn the hard way." As we rode the elevator to the executive floor, I considered how far we'd come in just 2 months. The son who had been ready to move me to a retirement community against my wishes was now demonstrating a level of self-awareness and genuine change I wouldn't have thought possible. The board meeting progressed smoothly, with the nepotism concerns addressed through the transparent governance protocols we'd established. Alexander participated appropriately when his new department's initiatives were discussed, neither dominating the conversation nor shrinking from accountability. Afterward, as board members filed out, the chairman lingered to speak with me privately. "Remarkable turnaround with your son," he observed. "When you first disclosed your relationship, I had serious reservations about whether he could adapt to the new dynamic." "People can surprise you when given the right opportunity," I replied. "Indeed." He gathered his papers thoughtfully. "The board is unanimously supportive of your succession planning proposal, by the way. The 5-year transition timeline seems appropriate, and the governance safeguards are thorough." I thanked him, feeling a weight lift that I hadn't fully acknowledged. Was there? With the board's approval of my carefully structured leadership transition plan, I could now focus on preparing Pinnacle for its long-term future. A future that might eventually include Alexander in a meaningful role, but only if he earned it, through demonstrated capability rather than family connection. That evening, Alexander and Vanessa hosted a small dinner at their new home to celebrate both my complete recovery and the board's approval of the succession plan. The atmosphere was relaxed and genuine, so different from the formal, status-conscious gatherings they'd favored in their previous life. Emma proudly showcased her latest podcast episode, an interview with her school principal about women in educational leadership, while Jacob demonstrated a new feature he'd added to his app with Alexander's guidance. "I've been thinking," Alexander said as we enjoyed coffee on the back patio after dinner, "about the foundation you mentioned in your estate plan, the one focused on technology education for underserved communities. What about it? I asked, curious. About his interest. I'd like to get involved as a volunteer, he said. Not as a board member or anything official, I haven't earned that. But maybe helping with the mentorship program or the coding camps for middle schoolers. It was exactly the kind of contribution I would have hoped for, but wouldn't have suggested directly, allowing him to support the Foundation's mission without position or title, simply contributing value where he could. The next coding camp is in 3 weeks, I told him. They're always looking for volunteer instructors who can relate to the kids. I'd like that, he said, and I could see he meant it. As I prepared to leave later that evening, Vanessa handed me a small gift bag. Just a little something to mark your full recovery, she explained. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny house key. To remind you that you always have a home with us, she said quietly. Not because you need it, but because you're always welcome. The simple gesture, so different from the elaborate but impersonal gifts they'd given in the past, touched me deeply. Driving home, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past few months. What had begun with betrayal, my son attempting to move me to a retirement community without my consent, had catalyzed a profound transformation in our family dynamics. Alexander was growing into the thoughtful man I'd always hoped he would become, finding his authentic strengths rather than chasing status and appearance. Vanessa was discovering purpose beyond social positioning, building something meaningful that reflected her newly awakened values. The twins were flourishing in an environment that emphasized substance over show, developing interests and abilities that might shape their futures in ways none of us could predict. And I had found a new chapter in my own story. Neither the hidden, founder maintaining an artificial division between my professional and personal identities, nor the marginalized mother being shipped off to Sunset Meadows for convenience. Instead, I was fully integrated. Eleanor Crawford, founder and chair of Pinnacle Innovations, mother, grandmother, mentor, and still very much the author of my own continuing journey. As I pulled into my driveway, I glanced at the framed photograph Alexander had given me that morning. There we were, 28 years earlier, tired but triumphant after solving a problem together through perseverance and creativity. Perhaps we'd needed to lose our way before finding it again, this time with greater wisdom and appreciation for the values that truly mattered. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, at Pinnacle, with the foundation, within our evolving family, relationships. But tonight, I was grateful for the difficult path that had led us here, to this unexpected but welcome new beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.